Hello and welcome to another episode of the Auto Guide Show brought to you by eBay Motors. This week we have a ton of Honda and Acura news. I drive a bus and Kyle drives something fancy. Picture this. You're halfway through a DIY car fix, tools scattered everywhere, and boom, you realize you're missing a part. It's okay because you know whatever it is, it's on eBay. They've got everything, brakes, headlights, cold air intakes, whatever you need, and it's guaranteed to fit, which means no more crossing your fingers and hoping you order the right thing. All the parts you need at the prices you'll love, guaranteed fit every time. eBay, things people love. Okay, so let's get started with something I've talked about on the show many times, but the review is finally live, and that is the VW ID Buzz that I had for 2 weeks over the holidays. So as you can see from the picture, if you're watching, and if you're only listening, you can imagine, but it's interesting, this color isn't in the US, and that really threw me off when I was trying to figure out how this bus is put together. So now I can't remember the name of the color, but it's a gray with the white, yes. But in the US, they have like a dark blue with the white, but they don't have this gray. So I guess the different countries got to pick, from the master list of colors from Europe what they wanted. So it's the most unsuspecting two-tone. I mean, you could get a solid gray, and I think there's also a solid
black,
yeah. And those would be more unsuspecting. But it's interesting because it has the white heritage wheels. They call them the disc wheels, but they're the old Volkswagen wheels, and similar ones were on the reborn Bug, the Beetle, but it didn't work as well as it does on here. It works so well here.
It looks so good.
But it's one of those things, people are oblivious on the road, which sadly is most drivers. They don't notice it, but those who do notice it go by, or if they know what it is, like they take second and third and fourth looks. I had 2 Cybertrucks chase me down, and we were checking each other's vehicles out, and I mean, that's the only thing that gets as much reaction. And if we had this in that blue or yellow or green, I mean, I don't think you would be able to drive anywhere without having phones being pulled out. It's a vehicle that I don't think anyone can be mad at seeing it. I mean, you can be mad about aspects of its price and range, which we'll get to, but it's just a smiley vehicle.
Yeah, it is. Funnily enough, I don't think I've mentioned this to you until just now, but we were out on the weekend, and my wife and I went to a cafe, and I actually saw this one drive by. It was the press vehicle, and it drove by the cafe, and there was a group of women that were outside having coffee, and all of them were like, "Oh my God, look at that!" and like pull out their phones. Like, to your point, like it's impossible to see a negative reaction to this when it's a visual, like spotting on the road thing. Maybe it'll change when it's around for a few years, but right now it's just joy.
Yeah, this is interesting because I guess it's because its history is pretty joy-filled. Like, everyone remembers the buses from the 50s and 60s and 70s, like in used, and older people, a lot of them, like their parents or family member had one that they remember driving in, or some people bought them used when they were in college. Like, there's all these stories about them, and you and I were a bit too young for the original bus, but the Westphalia was sort of the equivalent, which was styled much like this. It's just kind of in between the two. And I love this thing had the roof that popped up to make a tent. But yeah, like you think of the Hummer and the Cybertruck, and they get mixed reactions, and rightfully so. But I think that's because what they're based off does too. I don't know. It's hard to explain. But this is it's big too, but people love it. And inside, it is so spacious. We've said this many times, but because it's an EV, there's no transmission tunnel, and there's nothing in the back, and it doesn't have a stowing third row, which I guess could be a downside, but Volkswagen doesn't have to worry about making room for that. So third row space has more legroom than the front 2 rows. On paper, it has 42 point something inches, which is more than the first or second row. Headroom slightly lower, but it's still almost at 40 inches. And I mean, there's a lot of tour SUVs who don't offer you 4240 in a car. This is the third row. Downside, it only seats 2, but if you get the captain's chairs like ours had, you can put 6 full-size adults of almost any size in full comfort in this. And like, what other vehicle can you say? Like, even a Suburban that's not overly working, like the third row still kind of sucks in those vehicles.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's so much fun. The downside, which I alluded to earlier, is range is not great. So we're talking 234, 231, depending on single or dual motor. Canada, that's 371 to 377, I think, something like that.
370 something.
372.
373.
372, I think, whatever. We had this in winter where the temperature was slightly below freezing. It wasn't super cold. And I would say I was driving pretty mixed, more highway, and our highway driving is higher than like optimal speeds. And I was getting about 330 to 340, depending on the charge. So not a huge loss. I mean,
No.
if you took a gas car on winter gas in the cold, it's probably losing the same percentage. It's not terrible. But when you already have limited range, you feel it more. In 3 hours, I could easily deplete that battery. I could deplete it before 3 hours. Which, I mean, that's a good chunk of time, but at the same time, it's not. This is a van that, like I said, fits 6 adults, or can tow 5,000 pounds, or take luggage. Like, if you're going, not even on like a cross-continent road trip, just for example, if you want to drive Detroit to Chicago, are you going to make it on a single charge? Like Toronto, Montreal, no, you have to stop. And a lot of EVs will. I mean, you have to charge once you get there, but that's fine. This one, and it's the battery. It's I think it's 86 or 87 kilowatt usable net. It's like a 92, but the actual usable, which is the biggest Volvo, the biggest Volkswagen has, but the buzz is huge. So, it's 6,700 pounds, which again, that's a lot, but relative to other EVs its size, it's not as much because it's a smaller battery. But I don't know. Should they have maybe double sandwiched it like GM and got 160 out of that? I don't know.
Does it drive like a 6,700 pound vehicle?
No, not at all. And I mean, that's the crazy thing with basically any. I don't think I've ever driven an EV where, well, there's one. It was the VinFast, but where you were driving, you like feel that significantly heavier. Like even the Hummer and the Silverado EV, like they don't feel like they're that heavy. Like you don't drive a Hummer EV and think you're driving a straight truck, but you basically are. And like this is like a heavy duty pickup truck in weight, but it doesn't feel like that. I mean, obviously suspension and stuff, but that translates to such a smooth highway ride. If you get to some choppy city pavement, it starts to get loud. Like you hear the bumps more than you feel them. Yeah. But on the freeway, it just, again, that's part of the range thing, is it's so well suited for everything it should do. I just wish it went a little further.
Yeah. Yeah, that seems to be the one issue. But I mean, it's doing well critically, right? It just one neck toy.
And in fairness, I mean, 98% of my life, I would never need more than that range, so it'd be fine.
But it's just it's the image of like going on an adventure with the buzz that kind of,
Yeah, and and technology is constantly improving, and the thing about this is they've nailed, I think, all the other parts of the formula. So you just wait for the battery tech to catch up. Whereas there's other ones that get good range, but the car itself isn't that good, or it's just not a good EV or a good car. So, yeah. Anyway, I think that's enough on the bus. Let's move on before we run out of time. So next up, the Subaru Crosstrek Hybrid has been announced. And this is kind of interesting because this was shown in Japan earlier last year. And I remember seeing it. And we've known for quite a while that the Forester is coming here as a hybrid. And Subaru's designing it with their own technology or in-house more. And then this just kind of came out of nowhere in North America. We're like, oh, right, because this isn't the old Crosstrek hybrid. This isn't the plug-in, because it's not a plug-in. It still uses the symmetrical all-wheel drive, still uses a Voxer engine, and it is using Toyota's hybrid
setup. And the motor,
like the motor bit, not even setup, just the like technology basically to work. And when it was with the plug-in, it was more than underwhelming because it had almost a 9 kilowatt battery, and when you added everything up, when you weren't on your all electric range, which was like very small, like I don't even know if it did like 10 miles or 15 miles, it got the same fuel economy basically as a regular Crosstrek. Whereas this is not going to be much heavier because it's a small battery. Like it's a proper true hybrid. So we like the Crosstrek. We always have it ranked high in its segment. In our big comparison, it came third. And some of the drawbacks, engine being a bit noisy, not quite having enough power, fuel economy was like mid-pack. This could address all those. So this could suddenly be really good. It's 194 horsepower, which it's only a 13 horsepower bump, but I can even imagine what the torque's going to feel like.
Yeah, and it's quoted because One thing that I noticed in this press release is they quote a torque figure, and Toyota doesn't do that with its hybrids. And the reason being, this is actually physical all-wheel drive, right? It's Subaru's symmetrical system, whereas Toyota's is all-wheel drive, and so that's another advantage that this has, where you still get that tried and true all-wheel drive system. I'm really looking forward to maybe having a rematch of sorts for this and the Corolla Cross Hybrid and the Seltos, the two vehicles that outscored it in our comparison last year. Because, yeah, if as long as Subaru keeps the price reasonable over the regular model, you're getting way better fuel economy, assuming based on other hybrid systems, better road manners. That's going to be quieter more often, and yeah, like the Crosstrek finds a really good balance of ease of use, and it doesn't feel too fancy where you're afraid to do anything with it. It's pretty rugged off road. It's spacious. Like, this could be a really great small SUV for people from any sort of needs view.
Yeah, you have a good point there about price, because that's part of the thing is the plug-in and the original. Remember the original Crosstrek hybrid from like the first gen? Those are like basically both of them were like compliance vehicles, one-off vehicles, and they were like a single trim, expensive. Subaru in their press release mentioned all trims of the hybrid will get this, all trims, like they kept saying that. So it makes sense the Toyota approach, like, maybe from sport up or something. I assume there'll probably be two, maybe three trims, and the Corolla Cross is the one I want to compare it to, because more or less they're using the same hybrid system, but in very different ways, different drivetrains. The Corolla Cross will demolish this in fuel economy because that's what it's set up for. But this will have the drivability, I think, because it already does, and we're just going to give it more torque. So.
Yeah. And I don't even know if the Corolla Cross will have that much more of a fuel economy advantage, right? Because, like, if I look at the regular Corolla Cross gas only against the gas only Crosstrek, there's not a big difference in terms of fuel economy. So this might have the bigger engine, but it's not going to be working as hard. So I'm very curious, and I never thought I'd be saying that about a hybrid small Subaru, but here we are.
It's got more mechanical bits to power, but yeah, who knows?
Yeah,
I mean, yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So moving on to another SUV that's electrified. This is a little strange. So back in the fall, we saw that Acura had trademarked the RSX name. And we were like, interesting, because there's an Integra already. What's that going to be? And I think I may have said it on the podcast. My thought was, that's going to be the coupe. And then when the Prelude came out, I was like, oh, perfect. The Prelude's twin in Acura by the RSX, and it'll be Integra based, like the Prelude Civic based, and maybe they'll give it like the turbo motor or something that the Prelude's not getting. No, it is a crossover. It is a fully electric. We don't even know the size. I mean, it's smaller than the ZDX.
Yeah, so it's roughly RDX sized.
Okay.
Yeah, I was on the briefing for this, and we were all like, "What? How big is this?" Yeah, so it's roughly that size, and it is a coupe over. It looks vaguely Seat-like, maybe not Seat. Seat's dead now. Cupra. Sorry, listeners who aren't aware, it's another brand that VW has over in Europe. It kind of looks like that with the color and the shape. And I know some people are really upset about this name because RSX. I just think it's an odd fit. I think, actually, I think some of us have already been talking about this off the podcast, is that this really would have made sense to have ZDX return on. It's a weird pick to bring RSX back because people who care about that car know that it was just an Integra with a different name for North America. And so there's not really any brand recognition beyond those people. So like, use ZDX. That would have made a ton of sense. That was your very ahead of its time crossover 15 or 20 years ago.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. The RSX is such a random name to pull from the past because it was a one generation renamed Integra that anyone who bought an RSX new or currently owns one is not buying this car. Like, that's a completely different market. So the ZDX ZDX makes so much sense because it's experimental. It's the coupe over, like and the one they called the ZDX, like you could have called that the Legend, the Vigor. You could have brought back one of those names that would have made sense because it's this big, family thing.
Although, seeing how it's going to be a one and done with the GM thing, maybe don't use one of your historic names for it. But like, I think that's the thing with Honda, right? Like, Honda made a ton of sense by doing Prologue as its GM tie-up EV, because it's like, oh, it's the beginning of something, and then they can do their own, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But
so one last thing before I move on.
Yeah,
the thinking behind it makes total sense because it is the RDX size, like you said, and I get the ADX, RDX, MDX. The DX signifies SUV, and this is a coupe over. So if it's R sized, but they don't want it to be DX, they're using S, which I guess RSX. But someone there should have thought like, oh wait, this probably isn't a good idea. Like ASX, they could have brought that name back. Could have called it anything. TSX. Oh no, wait, that was already a car too. So whatever. Like that's what it like the TSX. Then this like I don't know. Yeah, I get to try and differentiate it, but it's just
okay. So I guess LX is car based.
Yeah.
Except
the ILX,
Integra.
The TLX. Well, they just brought the name, but yeah, like the LX has always been cars, and the DXs are SUVs, and now I guess the SX that used to be cars is now SUV coupe.
Call this electrics. A Vigor. Anyway, well, we'll see. I mean, it launches this year.
So could call it like the CL, the like ECL, electric CL, because it's coupe, right? Yeah. All right. So moving on, Kyle drove a fancy EV with a muscle car name.
Did I drive an EV coupe over with a sports car name? Huh.
Now, in fairness, I wouldn't go. This is a full coupe over. It's just it's like the Cayenne Macan. It's just a swoopy SUV.
Yeah. It's also the best-selling Mustang. I really like rubbing that in.
Until the Spirit of America GTD shows up.
Yeah, all three of them. So I drove this down to Detroit last week. The Mustang Mach-E, it is the Select trim, which is the lowest trim, but it was still the extended range battery and all-wheel drive. So it's the same as every other one except the Rally and GT. It's still good. It's probably due for a refresh because the Mach-E has been rolling around for 3, going on 4 years now. But it's quick, it's comfortable, it's fairly spacious. The infotainment is good. Blue Cruise is very good, not as good as Super Cruise, but still a very useful thing for the delightful 300-mile straight line shot from here to Detroit. I like it. It's easy to use, and one thing that probably doesn't get talked about enough is that it's kind of fun to drive. I know people are like, oh, they shouldn't have put a Mustang name on it, but in this class, I struggle to think of a mainstream competitor that's as fun to drive, especially in the winter.
When we did that big SUV comparison, it wasn't a comparison, it's more like a feature of the 8.
Yeah.
This was one of the best there, if not the best. The problem is it's one of the most expensive, but it's sort of you're paying for what you get. This is a lower trim, so that'd be interesting to see price what it goes against, because it sounds like it still drives just as nice. And when I had the Mustang GT, Mach-E GT, not the car, and we put it against the EV6 GT, I thought it was a huge mismatch due to power and performance parts, but it actually was pretty good. It's much quicker than it feels, and I know the Kia guys were really mad at me because of this 5-second maximum boost, but it's like, if you do maximum boost in the Mustang GT for 5 seconds, you're probably doubling or tripling any speed limit. So you don't, unless you're going to regularly drag race it, but who's taking their EVs to regularly drag race? Like,
I mean, that sounds like fun, but
and I think we need to have a cruise off, Super Cruise versus Blue Cruise.
Yeah, cruise off. It was really good, and talking about how fun it is, just the regular trim, I really want to drive the Mach-E Rally this year.
Me too.
So
Mach-E Rally, Hyundai Ioniq 5 X, whatever.
XRT.
Yeah. That's a comparison I just can't wait to do, and we're taking them to the sand dunes. Speaking of an off-roady vehicle, so surprise, surprise, the CRV is getting a Trail Sport model. Let me guess. Maybe later this year, the HRV gets a Trail Sport model. It's the only one left. So
That seems like a weird one because it's gonna have trouble getting up hills off road.
yeah. So I mean, this just makes total sense. The CRV is a good, whatever. I don't know what to call this class anymore because they're not compacts, but they're not quite midsize.
Yeah,
But like,
yeah.
I almost feel like calling them the family SUVs. But this size, the CRV is a good one. The hybrid's a good one. I envision the Trail Sport would be a good one. If they give it the same treatment they gave the Pilot, then it'll be a winner because the Pilot Trail Sport, like we liked the Pilot, and that just makes it better. It looks cool. The squishier tires make it even more comfortable. It's actually quite capable off road because their system's set up pretty well when you get to those. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. What I'm very curious about and what Honda would not tell us during this meeting is whether Trail Sport will stick to the ICE only or if it will use the hybrid, because there has not been a hybrid Trail Sport yet. It's been all the V6 powered models, right? So if they do that, they have kind of a unique angle in the segment because no one else is doing it. Toyota had off-roady trims for the RAV4, which were actually quietly discontinued for this year. I don't think anyone really knew about that. And then there's the Woodland.
I was gonna say, how many of those did you see, or the Woodlands in the wild?
Yeah, I think I saw one TRD off-road. I saw a lot of the adventure or trail, depending on which country you live in. But now there's the Woodland, which is sort of like the TRD, but without the suspension, but it's a hybrid. And so there isn't really like a proper all-terrainy hybrid in this segment yet.
Honda obviously knows the answer, and I think they're not saying it because I don't envision there being a hybrid because we know Honda's hybrid system with that crazy transmission. It's the programming. You got to have the computer to program for the hill descent and when you're climbing up rocks and stuff. Like it's easier to do with the traditional transmission and brakes to torque vector and all that. But who knows? Prove me wrong, Honda. Prove me wrong. All right. So speaking of nothing we talked about, the Tesla Cybertruck. Yeah, it's awesome. The Tesla Cybertruck is getting discounted, but this was the truck that so many told me would destroy the F1 Lightning. No, that's not even what they said. They said it would destroy the F-150. Period. That this would be the best truck in the world, and no, it never was going to do that.
That's weird. Yeah, I thought this was supposed to be the best-selling truck ever.
Yeah, it was going to make conventional trucks go out of business and make Ford go out of business because no one would buy an F-150 that was way more affordable, way more practical, way more.
Wait, what was the best-selling vehicle in 2024 again? For like the 58th year straight.
The only way the F-150 won't be the best-selling car or truck or vehicle is if Ford just stops making it. Like,
yeah, if Ford just disappeared, then yeah, I guess the F-150 would no longer be the best-selling vehicle.
I'd love to know what their retention numbers are because I wouldn't be surprised if it's like an 80+% because that's it. Like, people who love those trucks love them. They won't even go buy a Dodge or Chevy. Like, they thought they're going to buy this. So this is sort of what we said about the bus and some other vehicles is these vehicles come out and they're super different and super cool. And they have a specific, like, not even specific, but people who just can't wait to have them.
Yeah.
And those people all go get them. But then what happens after that? Is there enough buzz left that people care? Or is it a good enough vehicle others will get it? And like through history, manufacturers have purposely put out cars like this knowing it has a short shelf life until people are done. PT Cruiser.
I was just going to say, so what you're saying is Tesla built a PT Cruiser.
But Chrysler, I think, always knew, like, let's do this. We'll sell them like crazy. And then there's no market to do it after. Ford did it with the Thunderbird, but I think that still undersold their thinking. But yeah, like, it's a 6-figure plus truck that it's cool. Like, it's all about image and style. And like I saw one again today. You still always double take like, oh, there's one of them. But how many people have that kind of money to throw around for something like that rear seat passengers have space and it isn't much of a truck? I know people say, oh, I can truck this, I can truck that. Yeah, but not a real truck. People who buy pickups to just drive around the city, yeah, this is a perfect replacement. But a lot of people buy them to do stuff with them. They have things that they tow. They want to just throw stuff in the back and they don't care if it dents or scratches the paint or breaks the bed liner. Like, you're not doing that with this.
Well, the added advantage with this is, like, based on the panel fitments, it already kind of looks like it's busted. Sorry,
But anyway.
Anyway.
So, yeah, if you wanted one and you couldn't afford it, maybe you can now. Well,
yeah, go nuts.
All right, well, that's it on that super high positive note. So we're going to take a another very quick break, and then we'll be back with our question of the week, followed by an interview with Honda about something we talked about last week on the show. And then Kyle and I'll be back to wrap things up. But first, before we get to any of that, we have a new segment with someone we know really well, and we're going to introduce you to. So this is the Auto Guide Show, brought to you by eBay Motors, and we'll be back in a couple seconds. Swapping out your tires? There's nothing like it. With eBay, you'll find the feel you're looking for, from smooth highway rides to grip for rough terrain. Get all the tires you need at prices you'll love. eBay, things people love. All right, welcome back. So we have a new segment that we will have a special guest for, and it's going to be on various automotive products. So if you could just introduce yourself and what you do.
Hey everybody, Greg Migliori. I'm the Auto Guide editorial director.
Yes, we got some more AutoGuide content on here. So we're going to be discussing various products over the next many weeks. And I mean, it's mid-January, so I think one for half the country that makes sense is talking about ice scrapers and snow brushes.
Yeah, I think there's fewer products that are going to really get you through these short winter days, cold winter days, better than a good ice scraper and or a snow brush. I think you got to have one in your car. I keep one right in the front of my garage too, just if like the doors are frozen, you got to have one ready to go too. And it'll save you money in the long run. That way you're not like using a credit card or doing some of those crazy like things people used to do, like throw boiling water at the windows of their cars. Like, don't do
away
that.
Cracks.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm the same. I have a brush in my garage too, because sometimes the snow's so deep I can't open my trunk or get into my car without dropping a foot of snow into the car. How important is it to have a quality one? Because they range in price and design.
Well, it's super important. And I mean, it also comes down to, on a very cold morning, do you really want, like, isn't it worth paying a little more if that's the case versus like having a brittle brush break off in your hand or something like that? Like, that's the worst feeling when you're out there, you're maybe trying to get like your kid to school, or you're trying to get to an important appointment, and the scraper like breaks. And then what do you do at that point? So I think spend a little bit more money, try to, try to enjoy scraping, if you will. We've got a pretty good list that we try to keep updated here with different editors' picks. We look at the different reviews out there, try to pull together something that's somewhat useful. And the one that I keep coming back to, I actually have this one, is the Mallory Cool Force 26-inch snow brush. It really rolls off the tongue, but it's a good one. I mean, the brush part is good if you get that kind of powdery snow, especially maybe you're like skiing or something and you're up north, as we like to say here in Michigan, where you get that kind of like flaky snow. It's good for that, but you gotta have like the heavy artillery on the other end of it. That's the scraper, and this one's actually pretty good too. So
I've actually had one like that, or very similar, and the nice thing on those are the handle, the grip. It's actual like sort of a spongy grip. You mentioned a good thing about bristles. I think that's a thing people take for granted is, yeah, there's brushes that are half the price, but if you can audibly hear the bristles scratching your paint while you're brushing off the car, you're not doing your car any favors. I am a huge fan of the foam brushes. So there's one on our list, the Snow Joe. I've tried that one, and I have a different one specifically right now, and I just like them because they don't scratch. Now, some people don't like them because they don't push as much ice off, but if you get a quality one, I think it's good.
Yeah, I think it's also important to look for like ones that could fold up, because even though you and I both like to like have them ready to go at the front of your garage, you might go somewhere, you're in a movie or a hockey game or whatnot, you come out 3 hours later and there's 3 inches of snow. So we've got some good foldable ones here you can check out. I think it's important too to make sure you store them. Like, I like to put them like right in the second row, or the trunk is fine too. I've had crazy mishaps, like where I'll just throw it into the passenger side, and then all of a sudden you look over and you've got this like spear right next to you. So you got to be careful with these things too. But it's that time of year, you really, you want to be able to drive safely. Most of the time you're not going to have 10, 15 minutes for your car to auto start and thaw out. If you're like me,
environment either.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to have, say, you have a Hemi V8. You don't want to let that idle for 15 minutes. Although I'll admit I've done that in some test cars. Hey, that's the way the world works.
But that was for research.
Research. You got to hear the exhaust note. How does it sound, right? Make sure that Hemi is continuing to echo across the neighborhood. And, or the better thing is like if you have a Jaguar, crack open an F-Type on a cold morning and, your neighbors' dogs, everybody's going to hear that car.
Back to the brush for a sec. The portable, foldable ones is a big thing because everyone loves SUVs these days, and my wife has one of those. We have a swivel head, adjustable head, and extendable because you're supposed to, by law, well, in most states and provinces, clean all the snow off your car before you leave, and that includes your roof. And when you have a tall SUV, like I'm pretty tall, I can't reach the top of most SUVs, but a brush can if it adjusts. So that's another important factor to consider.
You don't want to be the guy who's like taking off on like a cold morning with just like a glacier flying off their roof. That's just not cool. Because what you're doing is the person behind you is essentially having their own little polar vortex. So yeah, these are good tools for that. And then we also have some good hand scrapers. If you check out our list too, I think that's, you can throw those even in like a backpack or something. If you, for whatever reason, need to have that kind of hand tool. Which also, I kind of like these too. If you need to really like chisel off like something that's really embedded in there, so they can be good for that too.
Yeah, well, that's all great advice. One thing that I feel silly saying, but I think some people need to hear is remember, ice scrapers are for windows. They're not for the body panels, because every year I'll see one or two people doing that, and I just think that poor car. But thanks for the insight on this. We will have you back next week to talk about another, maybe topical, maybe not. Or it's not topical, seasonal, or maybe not. It'll be very topical. But thank you for coming.
Thanks, Mike.
All right, welcome back. So that was interesting. I mean, it snowed more this year here than it has the last 2 years, I think, combined. So putting my snow brushes to use. But anyway, moving on to the question of the week. This is sort of a play on one we've had previously, and it made me think of it because of the RSX. I mean, the RSX was cool. Like we said, it was an Integra everywhere else. So it's just odd you need to bring that name back when the Integra's already back. So it got me thinking, like, what other nameplates from the past don't really need to come back? Like, what automaker should not bring this name back? And this could be for any reason. It could be because no one remembers it, it was terrible, or whatever. So I'll start. I got a couple, so I won't take too long. But my first one is GM brought back the Hummer name with the Hummer EV, and people have talked about like they should make it like a Chevy Pontiac rebirth, but I don't think they'll want to bring back the Fiero name. Personally, I like the Fiero, but I don't think that's a name that we'll ever see again. Can you imagine a compact SUV called the Chevy Fiero, and it's this little EV SUV? Got an engine in the back. Got motor in the back. But yeah,
Okay.
I don't think that needs to come back, nor will it come back.
All right. Fair enough. I had one, but I'm going to take a bit of a left turn here and say similar, where I think the name that I've got is one that is pretty beloved by car weirdos like us, but probably not a good name to stick on the back of a car in 2025. Subaru, do not bring back the Brat.
I was going to say that. That was my next one.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I was gonna say
Yeah.
that. Just doesn't work. You know what, though? I think that would have been something not to bring back years ago, but I think now they could like play it cheeky with the original name, the Bi-Recreational Activity Trucker. I think that's what it was.
I mean, if they had any opportunity, they should have done it this summer, and they missed that. So you can't do Brat Summer ever again. So
there's an entire show question of the week about inappropriate car names from like 40s through 70s that should not ever come back. But
yeah,
we'll save that for another date. Well, since you just stole my Brat, I will use a different Subaru, and this is more along the lines of the RSX, is the B9 or the Tribeca or the B9 Tribeca. It's just a name that they don't need to ever bring back. There's nothing that there's not a group out there that's like, oh, I wish I'd make another Tribeca. I mean, they already did. It's called the Ascent, and it's much better. But yeah, that's just a name that I think will just stay away.
Yeah. Similarly, you know what? Actually, no, not I'm going to go with the first one that came to mind when we brought up this question of the week. Ford has a whole bunch of historic names to go with. Windstar is not one of them.
Okay,
Windstar or 500, but spelled out. That was another one. But Windstar in particular, it's like a lot of us, especially people like our age, have a lot of memories relating to Windstars. But
and the Freestar, remember?
And the Freestar.
But then like, Taurus XL because no one's buying it.
Yeah.
I was just thinking they're going to say Escort because that maybe doesn't fly so much anymore.
Well, but Escort
or Probe.
Wasn't Escort brought back in Europe?
Maybe, but I don't think they'll have the Ford Probe again.
Yeah, Probe won't.
That was an interesting. So my final one is one that I think really sums this up as everyone knows it. It was around forever. There's no reason to ever bring it back, and that is Cavalier. Don't think we ever need a Chevrolet Cavalier again. I almost went with that. Fair. Or Citation, the Cadillac Cimarron. Yeah. Anything on that J body, Sunfire. Yeah, we don't need any of them. I don't know the. I'm just gonna bandwagon on this one for my final one. I don't know the body name and GM code for this, but the Chevy Celebrity. Yes. That never needs to be a thing again. It's one of those deeply ironic names for a car, like the Mitsubishi Charisma, where it's just super impressive. Don't do it. I was gonna say, like the Cavalier died, but the Cobalt I would be okay with. Like if GM brought back a small little, I don't know, if they're bringing the Bolt back, make a coupe version of the Bolt and call it Cobalt. I think that'd be fun. Or if it's like a twin motor Bolt, it's the Bolt. Yeah. And Cruise, I like the Cruise name. I think that could totally come back. It could join our Super Cruise Blue Cruise comparison. Do you have Super Cruise on your Cruise? Is it a Super Trim? Do you have the Super Cruise on your Super Cruise? Well, I mean, now that we're getting on the American because we know them more, but there's a lot of Chrysler ones too. Like we don't ever need to see an Acclaim or a Sundance or an LHS. Yeah, Sundance. Yeah, or back to Chevy. Maybe they can start calling their trims Eurosport again. Ooh, yeah. Anyway, all right. So enough on that. I mean, it's not just them. There's some other brands that we don't need names from. I kind of talked about them earlier. I don't think we need a Vigor as much as we think it's cool. But anyway, all right. So we will be taking a bit of a longer break, and then we come back. We can talk about Honda and sort of their refocus, their redirection with their new Zeros. So we'll be back in a couple minutes on the Auto Guide Show brought to you by Motors. Picture this. You're in the garage, your favorite room in the house, and you're tuning up your engine with parts you found on eBay. Every piece is just locking perfectly into place. You step back to admire your work, hands covered in grease, and because you're committed to driving that thing further than the odometer can handle, you start to think to yourself, you know what, I could probably also use some new brakes, some shocks and struts, and this baby deserves a new air filter. So you head right back to eBay. You can find any part you need there, it's unreal. From wipers and headlights to cold air intakes, exhaust systems, and even that turbo you've had on your mind, eBay is the stocked garage of your dreams. And you've got eBay Guaranteed Fit. Because eBay knows DIY fixes can be major, and mods are always intense, so you need to know that these parts guaranteed to fit every time before you dive in wrench first. And in the off chance you order a part and it doesn't fit, send it back, simple as that. You know what you love more than the car itself is driving it. You're serious when it comes to engine maintenance, and you're locked in when you're headed into a build. And that's exactly why you start with eBay, minor fix or complete overhaul. You want to get your ride back on the road, and you've got eBay Guaranteed Fit. So eBay created My Garage, where all you have to do is add your ride's info and get the exact parts that fit. When you see the green check, you're a click away from that part clicking perfectly into place. So now that you know all that, imagine standing at that open garage door looking at your car you love more than anything, knowing that anything is possible. Whether it's keeping it on the road forever or turning it into something that's never been on the road before. Because with eBay, your garage just got a whole lot bigger. Get all the parts you need at prices you love, guaranteed to fit every time. eBay, things people love. All right, welcome back. We have someone here to talk about two vehicles that I think shot to the top of the list of the most anticipated vehicles of this year. If you can introduce yourself and what you do.
Yes, hi. Thanks for having me. I'm Jonathan Rivers with American Honda Motor, and I'm a department lead for our product information and creative services team.
All right, so we brought you on because we want to talk about the Zero, the SUV and the sedan that were introduced at CES last week, I guess. It's only last week. Seems like so long ago. So we just have a couple questions. I'll let Kyle start it off, but we're very interested in these new vehicles.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I'm yes, definitely very interested. So what we want to start with, I guess, Jonathan, is because it's such a departure from existing designs, both of these versus the current lineup. How important was that to sort of, separate these from existing Hondas from a design perspective?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, right? So, take a step back. So the global, CEO for Honda, Mr. Mibe, he basically said, look, we're essentially having this kind of second founding of the company, right? The second founding of Honda. And so this is kind of a way to restart, right? Start at zero, right? And so by starting at zero, it's a clean slate. And that includes everything from design to technology to features. So really that's kind of the preface for how things got started, right? And because of that, clearly, the designers had a lot of freedom. And then if you look at something like the Zero Saloon, for example, I mean, they obviously shot for the moon, right? And that's because again, it's supposed to represent the flagship.
So this is something I think everyone wants to know. How close to the vehicles we saw at CES will the production models be?
From a design perspective, everything is actually really close, right? So, if you remember back at CES 2024, the Saloon came out again as this flagship for the Zero Series, and that was a labeled a concept, right? And so it had that kind of 3D bar up front, kind of these horizontal headlights, kind of a much different front end design than the prototype that was released recently for CES 2025, and so. I mean, I think you guys probably know, typically when we say, something like prototype, then yes, that's much more close to a kind of mass production intent.
Yeah, Honda rarely seems to change from concept to production too much. You're not one of those companies that shows us something and then builds something completely different.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I think that's a lot about the design and the direction because, if you can imagine seeing, the Zero Saloon driving down your, local road or freeway, it's gonna make quite a statement.
Yeah, everyone will be looking to see what badges on the back, which leads to Kyle's question.
It's true. Yeah, we're gonna stick with design for a little bit longer because they really are just fascinating, both of the vehicles. So one of the things that we noticed is there's a retro logo on the Zero series, right? The retro Honda badge, and it's a trend that we're seeing elsewhere in the industry, and we like it because I mean retro is great. But can you just maybe walk us through the inspiration and the reason behind that sort of approach?
Well, it's interesting, right? Because at first glance, it would appear retro, and you're not wrong. Because yeah, essentially going back to the 60s and 70s, that's how the H mark looked. It kind of bowed out at the top a little bit. But it's not. It's actually like a recreation with that as the inspiration, right? So it is like a new H. It is a new logo. But it's like we were talking about earlier. It's kind of full circle back to okay, start over, but also kind of know where you came from, and then we're kind of building on that with this new future direction. So yeah, I like the new H. It's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the design too. Our next question is not really the same, but the last time Honda had a rear-wheel drive car in North America, it was the S2000. Now, this isn't that, but the single motors will be rear drive. Is there any challenges the team found or really enjoyed by building the platform around that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's, that's like the overall goal. And to your point, while we haven't released, motor configurations and specs and things like that yet, I think the overall goal is leveraging, motor technology, whether it's in the front, rear, or dual motor, or anything even beyond that, right? Because the motors are so compact, they give you instant torque, power, and now they're very efficient too. So yeah, obviously, like you said, from maybe a drive configuration, but let's not forget, on the Acura side of things, the ZDX actually is rear motor as well. So yeah, but like you said, it's something to give you really good driving dynamics, and that's something we always pride ourselves on.
Yeah, that's fair. We're excited just because it's going to be a very different experience in more ways than one. So actually, sort of building on that, since they are pretty unique vehicles from Honda's perspective, and I mean even within the market, where do you really see the main competition for both the Saloon and the SUV?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think, the SUV obviously is a much more traditional shape, and can compete with quite a few mid-size electric SUVs. There's a plethora in the premium segment. There may be people stepping up from the mass segment. I think for the saloon, it's much harder to peg that, right? Because it's segment busting. Like, it doesn't look or feel like anything else. It's not your typical sedan. It's not a wagon. It's not an SUV. So that wedge shape is inherently new and different than anything else. And so I think because of that, the hope with that and some of the other Zero Series products is that it allows us to capture new audiences, new segments, get people that, because they've never seen anything like that before, just consider it simply for how different it looks, or the fact that it's this kind of like flagship statement type of vehicle.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's a very statement vehicle, and that when they start to hit the street, I think people will notice, and I think it's the right kind of vehicle for that. Like the styling is out there, but it's still very. It seems very conventional in the sense it's not like the car is not going to be practical or usable. So I think it'll definitely flag people. Nothing else looks like it.
And that was one of the things that we heard at CES when media and others had a chance to like get up close, and some even got a chance to, sit in the saloon, is because, with our thin, light, and wise kind of ethos for the Zero Series, we were able to have these very, thin battery packs pushed to the ground, so that despite having that very low slung, roof line, you get inside and you're like, wow, there's a lot of space in here. So it's actually quite usable, and there's really good packaging as well.
This is completely off topic, but that's something I used to love about Hondas back in the day. I remember in the 90s and going to high school and getting a Civic, and it felt like you're almost sitting on the ground and there's so much space for the size of the car.
Honestly, it's one of our, I think, our prowess, right? Being able to do like really good interior packaging. It's always about, that synergy between man and machine, right? And so how do you find that human defined, space, right, inside the vehicle?
Yeah, so we just have one more question before we let you get back to your day before the weekend. This is on a different side of technology, so I'm not sure if I'm saying this right. Is it Asimo? Is that how you pronounce the new OS, or is it
So,
Asimo?
so, so the Japanese pronunciation is Ashimo, all right?
Ashimo.
But yes, I think most of us call it Asimo. So yeah, Asimo. Yeah, like you said, that's kind of the new operating system.
Yeah, I know you haven't released many details, and I don't know how much you've got to play around with it. But is there one thing about it that you're really looking forward to?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the overall, so again, it's like starting at a blank sheet. We were able to essentially design our own operating system from the ground up to, um, you know, customers are still going to have customization. They're still going to be able to tether their phones, do those kinds of things. But at the foundation, to have this kind of really cohesive, easy to use, beautiful, interface, like that was the goal. And so, yeah, when you get a chance to play with it, you'll notice, the multitude of screens. are there, but it's very cohesive. It's very easy to use. It's fast. Once it gets to production, we announced like there's going to be a really, a lot as far as AI is considered, right? So there's going to be a lot of personalization and customization, with the addition of AI as well.
I like that you mentioned it's going to have phone integration because not all of your competitors are doing that currently. So it's good to see a new system that still keeps the phones in play because that's very important, I think, to consumers.
Absolutely. And generally our products right now have that same mindset. And I think that's what we want to continue moving forward, giving people that flexibility.
Mhm.
Well, I mean, you're giving them flexibility just right off the bat with two very different shapes for a Zero. So, I mean, we're excited. Like Mike said at the beginning of this quickly becomes one of the vehicles or pair of vehicles that we're most excited to drive this year.
Well,
Yeah.
and it's interesting too because us bringing the SUV to CES, that was the first time we showed that, and that's actually the one that's going to launch first, right? We're saying that both cars are actually going to launch next year in 2026, but the SUV, especially given the segment and just how much sales potential is there, that's going to be the car that launches Zero Series, and then shortly after that, flagship is in the Saloon is going to come out as well.
Great. Well, we look
Yeah.
forward to that. I know the goal is to, like you said, get it out next year. So we wish you luck because it's quite an undertaking going from, like you said, nothing to a whole new everything in a car. So thank you for being on this show, and we hope to have you back once it launches, and we'll have a whole bunch of new questions.
Well, no, thank you. Very much looking forward to it. So, yeah, thanks again for your time, guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are back, and we are going to quickly fill you in on what's next. I think we've kept this podcast in a decent time frame for once.
What do you know?
This week, you and I are comparing two very popular, very mainstream vehicles. In fact, we were out filming it all morning, and we think de-thawed now. But it is the Subaru Forester and the
Nissan Rogue.
So why those two? Well, two reasons. One, the Forester was all new is all new for 25, and the Rogue got a significant update last year. And we tried to do this in the fall, but it didn't work. So we do have a 25, which is a little change, but it still holds merit. And when we did a full-blown segment comparison of 11 of them, going on 2 years now.
3 years.
2.5 ago. Yeah,
Yeah.
The Rogue came third, and it was the highest placing purely internal combustion engine, not hybrid. That was first and second or hybrids. And the Forester was more mid-pack, but the new one has improved its biggest weaknesses. So we wanted to see sort of where it stacks up. And we're not going to get into anything else, but the results were a little surprising all around.
Yeah.
I didn't really go in with any idea, but yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, it's one of those fun comparisons where, look, like as much as we want to say like everything is close, but sometimes it isn't. Sometimes we go in and we're like, all right, this is, we know which one is stronger here. And then very rarely we're like, whoa, that went completely different and we didn't expect it. But usually that's how it goes. But this one, I don't think either of us knew where it would end and saw where it would end. So it was, yeah, it was good. And it's fun to do these really, really ultra mainstream things because you do focus on a lot of features that really matter to a lot of people, right? Like these two combined sell something like 400 or 500,000 units a year in the US, not to mention however many they sell in Canada. So it's a big deal. I'm pretty sure they're both their respective brands' best sellers.
No, not Subaru. It depends where you ask, but in Canada it was 1 point, but the Crosstrack a long time ago, and in the States it was always Outback, and then the Crosstrack I think since passed the Outback, but I think Forester's third in the States. They love.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Go to the mountain states and it's Outback City, and I get it. I mean, it's such the perfect all around car for high altitude mountainy states that has dirt to snow to whatever. But
yeah,
that's good. Getting off topic. So next week, a little preview. I am driving something that is crazy that it's a rarity these days, and it is a compact car, a hatchback, or I think it's a hatchback. Yeah, hatchback with a manual transmission. It's the Mazda 3, and like that doesn't really exist anymore. Sentra, Civic, Elantra,
Does
K4.
the Sentra still offer a manual in Canada?
No,
They killed it,
dropped that.
right, with the
Yeah,
facelift.
the S is done. No more 5-speed base model. So
Oh, but there was an
race cars
SR.
out of it. I don't know if the SR had the 5-speed because the Sentra Cup had the S because that was the only manual.
No, there was a SR manual.
Oh, well,
A
it's gone
6-speed
anyway.
that you could get. Oh, crap.
But it's crazy.
Well,
Like that was the
yeah.
segment that you never thought the manual was going to leave because that was like the way to get into them affordably. And Mazda's positioning this more as an upscale manual option. So I'm looking forward to it. I haven't driven like a car in that segment forever, and that's like what I grew up driving. So I'm curious to see if it's still entertaining or not.
It's yeah. I'm very curious. I'm in something even smaller. I think it's smaller. I am in the Volvo EX30 next week. That is one that you and I have both driven very briefly at a industry event. But this is the single motor one, which makes it one of the more affordable EVs that you can buy in the US. And it's still 260-ish horsepower, so it's still pretty quick. It looks very funky inside and out, and it's a tiny little Volvo. So I am very curious to see what it's like to live with, because on my brief experience with it before, it was fast and fun, and the interior, or specifically the infotainment, kind of gave me some nightmares. So, so what's it going to be like over 7 days, or maybe slightly less, because I'll be on a trip as well, driving the new Toyota 4Runner.
Well, it's time to wrap this up, but I wonder if we had just said you're driving something rear-wheel drive and I'm driving something manual, if anyone would have ever guessed the two vehicles we were in.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Anyway, this has been another episode of the Auto Guide Show, brought to you by eBay Motors. We will be back next week with some more reviews and features and news and some new cars we drove.
So long, everybody.
Picture this. You're halfway through a DIY car fix, tools scattered everywhere, and boom, you realize you're missing a part. It's okay, because you know whatever it is, it's on eBay. They've got everything: brakes, headlights, cold air intakes, whatever you need, and it's guaranteed to fit, which means no more crossing your fingers and hoping you order the right thing. All the parts you need, at the prices you'll love, guaranteed fit every time. eBay, things people love.